All right, welcome back to the Daily Flex podcast. It's Tuesday. One of my favorite roughish hours of the week is talking PGA with my guys Pete and Colin. What's going on, guys?
I wanted to give a quick shout out at the start of the show to the Illinois men's golf team, currently in the semis now, beat South Carolina. They're on pace to face Texas in the finals. I am super happy about it. It's the one time I get to care about college golf, but I'm sure Steve Tricker's going to be happy this week. So go Illini.
I thought you were going to shout out the Warriors. I was not expecting Illinois golf.
We could actually just talk about Game 7 the whole time. All right, yeah, picks, I don't know, pick one of the big three, Lucas Glover or something. All right, let's just talk about Game 7 because, that also, what a huge game. I mean, that's, I figured I'd leave that to NBA guys, but, yeah, that was a good one yesterday.
Yeah, not just a good Game 7, but a great series.
I wanted to be best of 38. That'd be great. I don't care that the math doesn't work. It's that good.
Just run it back. Yeah, fortunately, I think Cavs are peaking as well, so hopefully have a really good finals. But it's going to be sad when basketball's gone and we have nothing but baseball and golf. But fortunately, golf is in a great place. If you look at what's happened recently, Spieth won his most recent tournament, Day won his most recent tournament, and Rory won his tournament. So golf's in a great place. They're all playing this week. There's a lot of stuff to talk about, but I know we want to talk a little Euro first, right, guys?
Yeah, well, before we even get to that, we'll start our podcast with just sort of what we learned last week. Pete, you had a pretty good week in the Dean and DeLuca, but, we'll just kind of run through, what you learned. Was there any guys that you missed on or that you hit on that you're proud of?
I was all in on Ryan Palmer, which I was really happy about, and that just continues to confirm this member narrative streak that we have. Some point I'll really love to back test that if we could ever really get a good list of guys that are actually members and when they play after. But that was nice. I think that last week was a week that I often overweight the weather, and I think it worked out pretty well last week with the early tee times. So I bought into that. So that worked out well. And, I'm really excited for this week. It was nice to finally have a decent week after a stretch of really some awful weeks. So, yeah, Colin, Euro was profitable too, thanks to Colin and FantasyLabs. So that's always good too. But Colin.
Yeah, I was happy with the debut of Euro. It's pretty much like the models did what they said in the box. Shane Lowry was mildly tilting for a guy that has good course history as he had, but it seems like he had kind of a very fluke of a meltdown. I don't know that I'll do anything differently going forward with him. PGA actually, what I learned on PGA this time. So this week it's a little bit of results-oriented tilt for me in that I got 5 out of 6 through the lineup and still didn't make the cash line, which it happens. That's totally within range. If you get 5 out of 6, but they're all in the bottom half of the draw, you're not going to cash. That's fine, especially with a 120 field. It did get me reflecting though, just because I also think in most of the cash games this week, the chalk did really well. A lot of the high percentage play, it's just they're firing off top 10s it's their business, and kind of got me wondering, we've been doing this for a couple months now. The game is evolving. I was just wondering what you guys thought of where the game's at, in the same way that they used to talk about the no limit games back in the poker days and the craze. Where's this level of sophistication of the game? Where is it compared to a year ago? Where is it compared to since we started doing this? Do you think people are getting sharper? And how close are we to cash games kind of getting to that, they're significantly tougher? Mostly I bring it up because I also met up with the FantasyLabs NBA guys who were in town this weekend. I had a bunch of fun conversations with them. I'm excited for what they're going to do next year. Product's going to be even better. But they all agree in NBA, cash games are the toughest it's ever been since DFS started. So are we there yet with golf, or is this just am I on a results-oriented tilt here?
I think the games in general are just getting more efficient. There's more good information out there. And, one thing that the industry has faced is some adversity recently. There's legal stuff going on in different states. Hopefully we get New York back soon, and that'll help. But, in general, there's a little bit less people. There's less people for sure coming in than have been coming in the past. And because of that, people are better. There's less new people coming in. Games are a lot more efficient. And I think that's happening even more in golf because a lot of the really sophisticated DFS players in general are trying to learn golf as a second sport for the summer. So it's interesting. I think there's still a lot to learn in golf. It's very easy to be results oriented. So I think people can do one strategy one week, win, and stick with it. Maybe they do a better strategy another week and lose, and they don't take away what they should from it. So it's a very challenging sport, but I definitely think games are getting more efficient.
Yeah, I think they're getting more efficient for sure. I think it's always a brave step to say, oh, well, this sport is unbeatable now. That's been kind of the battle cry of people who don't want to put in work, even since the poker days. Just because you're on a losing streak or you're not willing to adapt to the changing conditions. It takes a lot to make any of the DFS games unbeatable. Is it tougher? Yeah, sure, but I don't know. We haven't really reflected on this, and I think in golf there's so many fewer sources of information compared to something like football or basketball, where it's just overwhelmingly good advice. I like to think that FantasyLabs is probably it's influencing people in a statistically significant way, just given how small golf is. We can't control that. We kind of know that doing this podcast every week. Our job is to make everyone better. So sure, the games get tougher as a result, but that's also kind of gratifying to see, because I'm sure we have no insignificant part in that. So It's good and bad to see.
Right, and I think that's key. It's always one of those things that people have talked to me about, especially as a player, especially playing high volume. The giving information and what that does to the edge, and certainly, especially Colin, I'm sure you're feeling it. You were doing this all on your own before. Now it's publicly available on FantasyLabs. And the games do get a bit sharper, but in general, that's critical for the industry to grow as a whole, is education and giving people the tools and resources they need to actually make lineups, because it's really intimidating for a lot of people to go in and to have all the data in one place is a big thing. That's always kind of been my vision, and that's what makes all of this sustainable. So it is a give and take kind of thing, but I hope everyone who's listening out there is getting better, and there's always opportunity to have a lot of success. You look at the top guys; they're crushing just as hard as they ever were. So it's a more efficient industry, but there's still opportunity, and educating people is definitely something that we need for the industry to be sustainable.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah, and I don't think, people talk about the edge in DFS or whatever sport you're playing. I don't think the edge shrinks a whole lot. Maybe a little bit as just sort of everyone that plays just gets a little bit smarter. I don't think it shrinks, more so it just moves around. Strategies change all the time. And we saw NFL and NBA DFS strategies change a whole lot this year. We're seeing that with MLB, and we're going to see that with golf. It's just the edge doesn't get smaller necessarily. It just moves, and you have to adapt or get left behind. So, and I think maybe some of our data and our adjusted round scores and our content, as we keep on innovating with our tools, I think we're going to hopefully help people keep on finding the edge wherever it may be. Cool. All right, let's now that we've got our talk out of the way, let's move on to our next segment, which is going to just be talking about the Euro Tour. So we're going to do a Euro segment every week. It's going to be shorter than our PGA segment, of course. It's going to just be briefly touching on the course for each week, and then we'll just give a couple plays that are going to be our favorite of the week. And so we'll start this week, and Colin, I'll kick to you in just 1 second, but I'll introduce it. So this week is the Nordea Masters. It used to be called the Scandinavian Masters. It is the Euro Tour stop this week. It's in Stockholm, Sweden, at the Brohofslat Golf Club. And it is, I think, going to be a fairly interesting tournament. And Colin, is the sort of course fit that you're able to do for PGA, is it just sort of the same thing for these Euro Tour tournaments?
Yeah, it's the exact same procedure. Just look at everyone's basically plus, not the classic plus minus from trends, but the plus minus of expectation, which I kind of talk about in my articles. See which stats are predictors of plus and minus, and just kind of see what pops at the end. This week is no different, and lo and behold, it looks like a bomber's course on the Euro Tour, which is almost like finding a unicorn in the wild. Man, they do know how to bomb it over there. I thought it was a finesse game. If I'm playing to vaguely stereotypical, I don't even know what that is. But yeah, it's a bomber's course. Keep in mind this week, by the way, and this is a good asterisk note, that they moved it back to Brohofslat and it was in PGA Sweden the last 2 years. So when you're looking at prior results, you're going to want to throw out 14 and 15 and kind of resort back to 11 through 13. So that's a brief programming note. And that is factored into kind of like I'm only looking at the course it's on this week. But yeah, it looks pretty well set up for Bombers. And there's some, interestingly enough, the course history fits all tend to have Swedish last names, which I kind of makes sense in the abstract.
Colin, real quick, before you dive into it a little bit further, I've only 2 bits of information to add, which is not great. But one, they do have a island green, like TPC Sawgrass. Not that affects anything for us, but cool if you watch it all. If you watch it all, it's going to be entertaining. It'll be on Golf Channel, which is nice. 2, which is actually relevant, Henrik Stenson is the class of the field. The only reason he's playing this is because he's from Sweden. But he's missed his last 2 cuts. And he missed a cut. I can't remember the tournament, but we all had him as the number 1. He was the number 1 most owned guy in cash, course fit.
That was not Sawgrass?
Was that? Yeah, that was Sawgrass. That was the players, right? So he was. We were all on him for Sawgrass as the players. But now he's missed 2 cuts in a row. Is there any concern about him at all?
I mean,
is he just a lock in this situation? Not a lock, but is he clearly the number 1 guy?
No, not necessarily. And again, that depends on how much you weight course history. But I guess like there's a decent transition of picks. Like bias, I have a tough time distinguishing from a pure expected point standpoint between him and Alex Noren. And Noren's a guy who kept popping in kind of like the beta version of my models before FantasyLabs. He didn't have a whole lot of stuff on his log, but even in like Jeff Sagarin's golf model too, he was suspiciously high. I had him pretty high going into the U.S. Open. He just didn't play a whole lot. And if you look at his course history here, he has like 3 top 10 finishes in the last 3 years. Even this tournament, the last 2 years, it's a different course, but maybe it's still, I don't know if they're going for the same aesthetic, but like he did really well in the Swedish Open there. I have to believe there's some sort of home country feel to him that is particularly boosting. Yes, Stenson is Swedish also, but there's nothing necessarily saying that Stenson has to have the same boost from home country advantage. So given how expensive he is, like, I don't know, that just from a long-term adjusted round, his going off a cliff at Sawgrass was enough where it's like, it's enough a concern where he's not necessarily the class of the field, or like I would just assume pivot to Noren and get the savings.
Cool. Anyone else that you're liking down in the bottom tier at all, or mid?
Oh yeah. There's a couple. Like, I mean, just honestly, when in doubt, pick the Swedish names this week. Seriously, Mikko Alonen is definitely, I think, the best bargain in the mid-tier range. I feel like he's going to be a staple going forward. If you want just a slightly another higher end guy, Ross Fisher has great course history. Bradley Dredge continues to be kind of like he's following the same arc that Danny Willett was, complete with like just one of the most English names I've ever seen. Yeah, he missed the cut last week, but like it wasn't by much. I'm not his long-term form. He's just still so competitive with the top guys whenever they're here. And I even like Matthew Fitzpatrick a little bit. I know he's a big guy for you, Pete, every once in a while, maybe a little bit too inconsistent for my liking. But the other name I'm actually really happy to see, since it's a Bombers course, is Nicholas Colserts, the muscles from Brussels. You don't find too many Bombers in the Euro Tour, but gosh, if he doesn't fit the mold pretty well, and his course is pretty well set up for success this week. So I guess there's a bunch of different ways you can go, but like all else being equal, A, pick the guys with the Swedish names this week, and B, Alex Noren is probably the one that should be basically a lock in all formats based on course history.
Cool.
Fair enough. Lee Westwood at all? He had that great Masters and has had 2 pretty good finishes. I know he's dealing with some ankle injury, but I saw that he was fighting through it, and I guess if he could go 4 rounds last weekend in the BMW, then he's going to be fine.
I feel like I've always been a little bit bearish on Lee Westwood relative to everybody else. I mean, even when he kind of played some PGA events, I'm kind of like, there was like, he's always just seemed a little bit overpriced. Let's see if I can pull up exactly why. So I think a big chunk of his thing is he did win this event in 2012. I mean, it's 1 point of course history. Sure, it's that was 2012 Lee Westwood. So you gotta kind of separate like when he was like way better 4 years ago. But yeah, there are just a couple like too many miscuts on the Euro Tour, which is why I was like mostly bullish from him at Abu Dhabi and Dubai. won the Links Championship in October. I don't know. I'm just not as bullish on his long-term adjusted round, especially when adjusted for he's missing the cuts on the Euro Tour, and that's just always a death sentence for me.
Okay, fair enough. All right, well, that will end our Euro segment. We'll do this every week, and that one is about the Nordea or Scandinavian Masters. So I hope you guys enjoy that. Good luck if you're playing Euro. All right, we're going to transition to our PGA Tour tournament this week, which is the Memorial Tournament. This is Jack Nicklaus's tournament. He actually designed the course, which is Muirfield Village in Dublin, Ohio. And it's sort of just all about him. There's even a statue of Nicklaus teaching some kid how to golf. So it's a very Nicklaus course. We'll get into course history and course fit rather in just 1 second, and we'll go over some questions and the players. Quickly, recent winners: David Lingmerth won last year at -15. Matsuyama actually won 2 years ago and played very well last year. He's only played this twice. Kuchar a year before that. Tiger Woods has won it like a billion times. He won it back in 2012. Steve Stricker the year before that. Colin, so I'll kick back to you. Course fit. This is sort of an interesting course, I think. So I'm actually really curious to get your thoughts on this week because it seems a little scattered to me.
So course fit is, again, on the weaker side this time. And I don't think that's due to a whole lot of changes in the course composition factor. Memorial hasn't undergone too many, or Muirfield Village, rather, hasn't gone too many major redesigns. I have it at about 2/3 bad putters and 1/3 driving accuracy in terms of who gets the bonus this week, which is kind of an interest. I mean, I don't really have to know how a course lays out or like why that would make sense from like a course architecture perspective, but that's kind of an interesting combo that I haven't necessarily seen before. Like the greens are easier and it rewards hitting fairways, I guess. Pete, what does that course look like to you when you hear bad putters and accurate drivers have the edge this week?
That sounds potentially right. I mean, the one thing I noticed from looking at the course and just looking at some of the history is that the par 5 scoring is absolutely critical. The four easiest holes on the course are the par 5s. That's where the most birdies are made by far, which is critical on DraftKings. So you do want the guys who have great par 5 scoring, which favors bombers a little bit, which goes against what you're saying. But I think every week you want the guys who are, hitting it far, hitting it accurate, and getting a lot of greens and reg. But that's just good golfers. So I think that's kind of what you're really focusing on here. There's some interesting course history stuff that's nice. Matsuyama, I think, is a perfect example who has the distance, amazing ball striker, is accurate. The one potential weakness in this game is his putting, and that weakness might not be as big of a deal like you're saying here. So I love him this week. We'll talk about some other guys, but certainly makes sense. And maybe this is a week in the model where you favor both driving distance and driving accuracy. You still want a hint of the bombers in your teams because it is still a relatively long course. The par 3s aren't short by any stretch, and there's some long par 4s as well, which obviously is beneficial to the guys who hit it farther.
Yeah, and one of the other features that I kind of wanted to bring up, and this is based on the very recent course history work that I've done, and we're going to have an article about it next week, is I think a recurring question is how much does course history matter at this particular course? I think that's a question worth asking in the abstract. It's definitely not a one-size-fits-all rule. I found this course history still matters this week, but I give it a little bit less weight. I guess maybe lighten it by 20% from the usual amount is my gut feeling. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know why that. We'll get into that in the article about why does a particular course have more or less weight, but or maybe if there's certain course types that are more prone to it really pays to have played this before and kind of success is replicable here. But I give a little bit of less weight, and we'll get into it with Matsuyama about how much does that discount really apply there.
Okay, cool. Yeah, good thoughts. All right, let's quickly hit on I come up with some questions, and now that I'm looking over them again, I think it's short of just one question, especially as we're sort of talking it here. All right, so one thing I found, guys, when I was looking through our trends tool, which quick plug is now free, so please go try it out. There's some really cool things in there. Anyway, what I found was at this course in the last 2 years, there's really high plus minuses. I mean, the guys who are in our top tier salary range, so $9K and higher, have had average plus minuses of plus 9.74. And in general, golfers are a plus 3.85. So you're talking that, the average golfer is outperforming his salary-based expectations, which means potentially DraftKings is just sort of low on prices for all these players. And then I guess sort of a second part to this topic in question is something I've been wondering lately: are the top players underpriced given their upside? If you sort of just look at the distribution of their Vegas odds to win, and we saw this with Jordan, even though I don't want to get too results oriented, I think they're just sort of the distribution of Vegas odds doesn't really match up to the distribution of their salary. So I think there's a lot of value in those guys with high upsides. So I guess is what I'm asking is especially in a tournament like this week where it's an invitational, so the field is stronger, doesn't it make a whole lot of sense, especially this week, and maybe just how golf DFS is going, where stars and scrubs is just sort of the way to go. It's the most optimal thing to do, even though that's sort of, I don't think you guys have been supporting that idea in the last several weeks, but it's everything I come to when I'm like doing my research. It just seems like stars and scrubs is the way to go for me.
I'll take it's a two-parter, so I'll take it in one. One, why are the course plus minus is so high? I think it's really just because it's an easy course. Yeah. We talked about it last week, a scoring environment. Sometimes the winner's going to put up, minus 22. Sometimes it's going to be minus 8. And sometimes you're just going to get bigger scores from week to week. It's an open question on an easier course. Does stars and scrubs make more or less sense than a tough course? I still think that's to be determined. But my assumption is it's going to be the same no matter what, just because trying to figure out essentially who wins those tournaments is still really tough. There's a lot of randomness. And to your second question, are high-priced players, are they undervalued? I wrote a couple articles on this, and I mean, I'll still say no, just because the whole premise of the argument is if you're pricing, if prices are correlating with odds to win, and odds to win necessarily prices in upside, then from an average scoring position, then no, I don't think that the top priced players are still necessarily undervalued in terms of average number of points. I think another reason why some people may come to stars and scrubs lineups, and this is something that I struggle with from time to time, is oftentimes your scrubs that you're really high on, oh my God, they're popping great, naturally allow you to slot in a lot more stars. And just because your scrubs are popping really high, it's an unresolved question. Does that mean they're really valued, or does that mean they're an outlier in your process? Lucas Glover is probably a prime example that I think of from week to week. Egan Bradley was the one before. We're like, yeah, they're really cheap, but does that mean that I'm missing something? So I haven't seen enough to convince me that the stars are still, from a cash game perspective, you don't play them as much. And I think that, especially at this course, it's still a small sample size in terms of why you're seeing those true numbers. So that'd be the one I default to, but I have pretty conservative standards for shoving me off of my hypotheses.
I guess my thought is that in golf DFS, and I think we can actually sort of bring up other sports because I think there's some correlation here. Oh, yeah, in golf DFS, I don't think it's important to get average or just safety with your top golfers. You're not going to pay the price for Jordan Spieth to have a good round. You're going to pay that much because of the upside that his Vegas implied odds are telling you. So it almost doesn't matter what their safety is. And I think it's sort of similar to NFL. If you're going to pay up for Antonio Brown, you're not paying for necessarily safety. You're paying for the chances that he can go off for 2 or 3 touchdowns. NBA is a little bit different. You'll pay the top guys, LeBron James, because he's relatively safe, and you can hope that maybe the lower guys can match up to it. But maybe this is just this difference between volatility of DFS sports. But yeah, it's less important to me, I think, for these top guys to have safe, good rounds, and more important, if I'm going to pay up for a guy that's 10K or higher, I want him to win the tournament. So I'm going to take the guy that has the best chance to win the tournament.
Right, and we're talking. I think I'm more talking about cash, and you're probably more talking about VPPs.
It's all relative to the game type. First of all, that's the most critical part. Matt Kuchar doesn't have as much win equity as other guys in general, but if you're playing cash games, especially in a tournament like last week, not being results oriented, but he popped. He had great history. We loved him. He's a top 10 machine, has more top 10s than anyone since 2010. You want a guy like that that's a discount from the really, speed Rory day to fit in a more balanced roster and cash where you feel great about guys making cuts, because making cuts is everything in cash. And in tournaments, you need the guys who win. Like, you absolutely need them. And in this specific tournament, I think it's an easier course. It's an invitational, so there's only 120 golfers. 70 will make the cut. There's a higher percentage of them making it. And you have all the best golfers in the world. So, of course, it's going to make sense to have, a more star and scrubbish type lineup, especially since there's different ways you can go stars and scrubs. You can go, fit in a Rory a day or a Spieth and, another top guy and build with some really cheap guys. Or you can do kind of a more balanced stars and scrub lineup and do like a Hideki, Bubba Watson start to your team. So there's just a lot more options with all the best guys in the field. And these top 10 golfers, these world-class golfers, I like to call them, they separate themselves so much from some of these other guys, especially in conditions like this where there's going to be a lot of birdies, especially on par fives.
And it seems like you mentioned, Pete, the fact that it's an invitational and there's only there's just less golfers. There's 120 golfers that are going to play this weekend, but we still have the same cut rules, which means the top 70 are going to play. So it's just a higher percentage of the actual field gets to play in the second weekend. So on a normal weekend, you have to worry about those lower guys missing the cut, but more of those guys are going to sneak through and have get to play on Saturday and Sunday. So maybe that favors even more a stars and scrub as opposed to a balanced lineup, because you can bank on those lower tier guys getting into the weekend more than you can in another weekend. Do you buy that at all, Colin?
Yeah, I think you can bank more for sure. It's just I think that consistency and safety is still a relative. You can measure that to some degree in DFS, especially for golf. I just am inherently weary of with a lower tier. Like, there is no such thing as a safe guy. Like, there's no such thing as a safe scrub, basically. I take that, and then so it's a question of it's almost the analogy I was thinking. Actually, it was just in DFS golf, it's almost like home run hitters are disproportionately expensive. Yes, their expected payoff is huge or whatever, but I actually don't play a whole lot of MLB. Do you put power hitters in your cash games, or is that something is that safe type of thing, or I don't know how safety works?
Yeah, you put power guys in your lineup.
Yeah,
in your cash game,
yeah.
You want the upside, because they can go for 4, but they can hit a home run. But if you have a lot of guys in your lineup that have upside, the likelihood that 1 or 2 of them has a good night is somewhat high. So it's priced in so much because a guy is going to average more points over time that hits a lot of home runs and may strike out more and be kind of a swing and miss guy than a guy who just bangs out singles, because their singles are worth so much less than the home runs. Especially
you also have 9 guys to work with in baseball, though. I think that's a big difference. Right. The odds that you don't have a home run in a 9-person lineup are way smaller than the odds that you don't have a guy that goes off in a 1-6 lineup in golf.
Missed cuts are also just so bad in golf. I mean, a guy going 0 for 4 in baseball doesn't kill you, but a guy missing the cut, especially last week, it ruins your cash game. So, yeah. But let's dive into the picks. So, which side do you want? Which side of the draw do you want here, Colin?
I think I'm up for top tier this time. Is that is it
sure.
Opposite what we did last time? That?
That's
Sure.
right.
I'll go with it. All right. So the big 3 are the big 3. In terms of, I think there still is there's a pecking order between the 3 of them, though. Yeah, all of them won their tournaments, but Jason Day and Rory McIlroy won their tournaments by larger margins. They have a couple fewer missed cuts lately. I think they're still a decent class above Jordan Spieth in terms of just between the upside and just everything going for them. Especially considering that, I don't know, I also can't figure out Spieth's ownership. We were all pretty sure that everybody would be fading him coming off a bad outing, and he was still decently high owned. And
no one fades any of these guys. Just get over it. I hear people talking about how Fowler or all these top guys, they're just always owned, no matter what.
Yeah, and that's fine. I wonder how much of that is just the public being inelastic to how they're doing, or do people just understand the top 3 have enough upside that it's going to warrant almost a base level of exposure. I think
the latter, yeah.
It's a combination, I think, too. And I think one other thing that we don't think about enough, and I notice it for sure, especially some guys, even in high stakes, Some guys just have golfers they like, and they're just going to continue to ride them. Some guys, I'm playing Jordan Spieth every week. I love Jordan Spieth. Some guy, it's one of those things. The same guys play the same golfers. Everyone has their favorites, and these guys are never like severely underowned. Only example I can remember is when Spieth was somehow 3% in the Thunderdome. But
yeah, and I think it's all been just like skyrocketing from there. Apparently, there's a never again crowd or like contingent that's just like, all right, I'm always going to have some exposure because it's Jordan Spieth.
Yeah, well, I mean, you have proper exposures more in the higher stakes tournaments than you will in these like massive. We have the PGA Millie Maker coming up for the U.S. Open in a couple weeks, and you're going to see broad exposures to all these top guys. So yeah, I think it obviously depends on where you play.
Yeah. Anyway, that's a digression. So, but in any case, like I mean, kind of related to what you're saying earlier. Like, I don't think that like with all top tier guys, like it's not necessarily a given that they're going to definitely produce enough. So, at what point, like, do I start maybe considering some top ties for cash? Two names right here off the top of the list: Dustin Johnson and Bubba Watson. I think are returning decent value so far. We kind of hadn't heard from anyone in a while, and it's not necessarily the same course fit, but just I can't remember the last time I saw Bubba Watson under 10K. And there's not a whole lot that's changed since then. Like, yes, he barely made the cut at the Masters, but he recovered pretty nicely from that. Did a stopover in Europe or like in Shenzhen for the European Tour, had a nice result there. And there's just not a whole lot that's like, I mean, like, and then what, Sawgrass? Like, yeah, but he never does well at Sawgrass anyway. It was about his average finish. There's nothing that's fundamentally different about Bubba than we saw like in a while back. I just don't see like that necessarily warranting under 10K. Dustin Johnson has always been essentially birdie machine. Maybe he's like, he's particularly good for DraftKings. Pete, I know you've been high on him for a while, but they're probably the most conceivable ones that could get in there. The ones that I'm least confident about as far as like why they're relatively low are Matsuyama and Kuchar, who they have great course history, but if I truly believe that you lighten up on course history as a weight a little bit less, then maybe they're a little bit overvalued in terms of pure points expectation. That's where I'm not necessarily sure that it's okay to lighten up on course history, but like if that's the path the data leads you down, then that's why they're so low. So I don't know. Top tier is a little fuzzy for me. I could see myself like asking why the data's wrong, maybe break my own rules. Pete, where do you think I'm wrong and why?
The public definitely loves Kuchar and Matsuyama. I think Matsuyama is one of the chalk picks this week. I mean, he's an accurate guy. He has great driving distance, or not great driving distance, but good driving distance. It's a lot of greens. The one weakness is the putter, and he's had exceptional course history here. So I know maybe it's weighted a little bit less, but I just don't see how he doesn't fit with course form or course fit and everything else. I mean, he's been playing great too. You look at his recent form; it's fantastic. So I like Matsuyama quite a bit this week. I agree with you. I think Day is my favorite out of the three, but it wouldn't shock me if any of them won. I do like DJ a decent bit. I think Kuchar, a lot of people will be on too, and it's surprising to me that you don't like him because he is an accurate guy. He's a guy who does well around the greens too, but I guess maybe the putting aspect is the reason you don't like that price.
Yeah, that's got to be it, since putting is such a huge part of it. It's just like this. I mean, course fit says give that much of a bonus to bad putters.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think the top tier is interesting. There's a lot of ways to go. It's excellent for GPPs, and there are a lot of good ones this week. So that should be fun. But, yeah, the one thing that I think we disagree on is Matsuyama. I think he'll be really popular. Yeah. It is interesting. Maybe he's a great tournament fade based on what you're saying, but I think a lot of people are going to flock to Matsuyama.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of nailing down exactly a little bit more precision in course history. Maybe if course history is different for elite players and top tier versus it is for the scrubs or something like that. It's an ongoing area of research for sure. Bubba, like agree, disagree? Like, are you surprised to see him under 10K?
I'm surprised to see him at that price, but just relative to these other guys, I mean, it makes sense why, the original odds had certain guys slated a little bit.
Absolutely.
I mean, he's right there, but I love him for tournaments. I'll definitely have exposure to Bubba in tournaments. I mean, you tell me the 4 easiest holes are par fives, and they're a lot, Bubba is going to destroy those if he's even playing remotely well. So I think he's a really, really nice play.
Yeah, I agree on Matsuyama. I think he's going to be probably the highest owned guy, especially in tournaments. He's, I think, clearly a little underpriced given his course history the last 2 years and how he's been playing. So definitely chalk. Pete, out of those top three, who's the guy that you're fading the most in tournaments?
I'll probably fade Spieth the most this week, especially after hearing Colin saying putting doesn't matter. That's really what saved him last week. I was watching the entire round on Sunday, and I hate to say he got lucky, but down the stretch he was just making putt after putt, and he does make more putts from that 20 to 30 foot range than anyone else by such a large margin, and it's consistent now. He's building up a decent sample of that, and I do think that is a skill he possesses that is the reason he's that elite, borderline number one golfer in the world. But at this course, I don't think I want him as much as Dan McElroy, and I think because he won last weekend, I think a lot more people are going to be focusing on him, and maybe you can sneak Day or McElroy for a little bit lower owned than Spieth. But all of them are great options, and pretty much anyone over 9,500 you can convince me is a good play.
Cool. All right. Well, let's move to our next tier. And again, just the tiers real quickly since we didn't hit on them before. The elite tier is 9K or more. Middle tier, which we're about to talk about right now, is 7 to 8-9. And then the value tier is 6-9 or less. So, Pete, I'll kick it right back to you since your turn to start off on this tier. 7 to 8-9, who's popping in your models?
So Paul Casey's the number one guy popping in this range, and it's by a good margin. I really like him. I've heard a lot of people talk about him. I think he's an excellent play this week. I like him in general. He finds his way into a lot of my teams. A couple other guys that are interesting. I'm curious to hear what Colin has to say about Cabrera Bello. If you weigh greens in regulation, he's going to be up there just because he hits so many greens. Duffner, Woodland, some of the usual suspects are rating somewhat well. One guy who I really like off the bat, especially in tournaments, I don't think many people are talking about him, and I think this guy is really underrated relative to his talent, is Justin Thomas. I think he could have a really nice finish here. Does crush the ball and is not more of an accuracy guy, but in tournaments, I think when he's on, he's really on. And I know that's kind of a weird thing to say, but I've seen it enough with him. And, he has the pedigree as an elite golfer, grew up playing against Spieth, they're best friends. And, a lot of people thought Justin Thomas was going to be better. And one final point on him, he's had very good line movement already too. So he's standing out. One other golfer that I know I definitely will bounce back on for tournaments is Kevin Chappell too. I think a lot of people will be, burned by last week and won't be bouncing off him, whereas 9,700, now he's 7,500. So classic kind of buy low opportunity with Chappell as well. But Colin, curious your thoughts on those guys and who you have ranking well.
So the top of the mid tier is kind of like, it feels like a greatest almost like a highlight reel of my usual mid tier suspects. Justin Thomas is number one up there for sure. Right below him, Daniel Berger is right there, who I'm not too surprised to see. I mean, he was as high as he's hitting 10K a while back at some of those kind of mid tier tournaments. So 78 is a little bit less. Brendan Steele, who I can never seem to get on the right side of, I think is probably the best value in the whole tier because he's kind of had a decent bounce back, and yet he's still at 7,100, which perplexes me a little bit.
He's popping for me too. I like him.
Yeah, and then but apparently that doesn't matter as much this week. So again, that's that's what the data says. And then JB Holmes is right there again, who I still can't figure out if he's just I think he's still fine. I mean, he's good overall. He's got a great long-term adjusted ground, but I don't know, something always just seems off for him. Maybe that's just me being results oriented for the times they didn't pop. Your other guys, I mean, they're sure they're there and stuff. I mean, the Chappell, Rafa, and Duffner, they're not as high as some other people. Maybe I don't have as strong opinions because course fit's a little bit weaker this week. But there are a couple, I have a couple names off the top of my head that I could still strongly prefer. I think Francesco Molinari is someone that in general.
Grillo, Love Mark, all those guys are really cheap.
Yeah, Grillo is and on top of which Molinari and Grillo are pretty consistent too for what they bring to the table. Webb Simpson back in the fold after a strong showing this week. I think so. It was good to see him competitive and stuff.
He changed his putting completely. He went to Matt Kuchar putts a certain way, and he came off the belly putter. So I think that's one thing overall that I would love to see some long-term analysis on is or at least something we can trend or track, is all these guys who've had to come off the anchor putter and how they're adjusting. And some of them have just struggled so much, like Keegan Bradley. Webb Simpson was another one, but then he's doing the same style that Kuchar does, and he putted incredible last week. I don't think it's going to be consistent, but at least there's, a positive sign that he's gaining confidence, and, when he puts it together, he can definitely score well. So I think
the interesting wrinkle is, like, what do you do with essentially transition putters, if that we're calling him, on a course where putting doesn't matter? Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is that net better or worse for transition putters?
Yeah,
better maybe, because like maybe if they're in transition that's skewing their results, then like they're bad at putting because they're figuring it out. So maybe in a course where putting doesn't matter, you get a slight bump. I don't know. I could see Webb's. I also don't know what Webb Simpson's ownership is going to be.
Right.
People are going to remember his result, but like I don't hate locking him in at 7,500.
Okay. All right. I guess I'll take the low tier real quick. Pretty much all my guys are right in that like 7K to 7,400 range. I got another guy who's kind of up there, I guess, is Patrick Rogers a little bit for me. He's doing okay in my model. Lingmerth, I think, will be popular because he won last year. Not sure how I feel about that. I guess he's 7,300 too. There's just a lot of guys. I don't see myself dipping too much. I mean, Scott Piercy's a guy that seems to pop up a lot for us. He's not doing terrible. Daniel Summerhays, another guy who's not awful in my model. But I really think the value is right in this 7K to 7,500. There's like 6 or 7 guys I really like.
Yeah, I think there's enough in the lower 7K range to fill out some value there. If you really want to go superstars and scrubs in the sub 6K range, like I say their names every single week: Hudson Swafford and Johnson Wagner, and yet they remain below 6K. I think like that, if nothing else, like if your last 3 or 4 tournaments, like you post solid finishes and make the cut, and your price doesn't change, you continue to be undervalued. And maybe it's just because like there's so many stars at the top that's why their price wouldn't budge, because their odds are so small to begin with. But I don't know, they're pretty good for flyers so far. The rest of the top here is, oh man, this is such my highlight reel all over again. Lucas Glover is there. Like, do you have opinions on him as far as what to do with him?
He's just the worst putter. I mean, I'm just done. Like, I get it. I get why they rank well in your models, but I just am done taking guys who suck at putting. It's just so frustrating. Like,
he missed the cut by 1 too, so it's not even.
I know, but he just doesn't make putts, man. Like, it's so consistent. Like, you talk to guys on tour, they're like, oh, Glover strikes it better than almost anybody. It just every time is fairway green, which is why our stuff loves him. But he just can't putt to save his life. And after watching Keegan and him in the same week, I just was. I said enough is enough, but
I don't hate it. Now, of course, like, oh, but what about a course where putting doesn't
tournament guys for me? When Keegan played that course, the putting didn't matter either, and he still couldn't make a putt.
Yeah, so the bad putting is truly inelastic to how much of like a booster.
If you're at a certain level, you've just like absolutely. And I know that we need to figure out a way to quantify it, but like these guys that just totally lost their confidence and just can't make anything. Like, it doesn't matter if it's easiest greens. They're missing on reading putts. They're missing pulling. They're missing on pushing. It's all over the map. One other guy I want your opinion on real quick though, Colin, is Jim Furyk, who does have great course history here. We get him at a really cheap price. If you look at his like long-term form, before the injury, he was fantastic. Did finish the last round he played pretty well. I think he still missed the cut. But yeah, 75-68 at the Dean and DeLuca that last round. Did play a lot better. 7,300 seems like a steal for him in some regards, but we still have the injury relatively recently. So what are your thoughts on him?
It's just too much. I mean, all else being equal, there's just not enough like recently that I just have enough to pull the trigger on. I have a long-term adjusted round, doesn't really have a time decay built into it because it's kind of set up for a steady stream of results going in most of the time. I think his long-term adjusted round is going to be skewed higher because like even if you just pull up his game log, you just look at like, oh, look at all these top 10 finishes. And then, like the last one was in September of last year.
Yeah, because then right at September, that's when he had the wrist injury, and then he's taking all that time off.
Yeah, exactly. So like, I just think is like his long-term adjusted round is basically fool's gold in terms of just like it's not wired for someone who takes like that long of a break. And I know course history is tempting here, but again, I'm going to do boilerplate this week. Course history, I guess, matters like a little bit less this time. And there's just, I don't think I'm missing out on some tremendous value here necessarily.
I know one guy, and not to get into Sahil Sud, one of the famous DFS player.
I've heard of him. Yeah.
Yeah, he played all the Furyk last week, and it's a lock. He plays Furyk this week. If you want one prediction, he ends up in Sahil's cash games.
Okay. Again, that could be like, I think like Sahil's probably better at like, I think he's like shown a couple spots where he can just like figure out when someone can turn at a dime like that and when the comeback is coming. That's not wired for long-term adjusted round. So that's
Sure.
way more subjective thing. The rest of this lower tier, third, fourth, fifth are Sean O'Hara, Roberto Castro, and Chez Reavie, which I swear is like, that's just my all-star team for sub 7K right there. So I'm happy to see them potentially in the mix. I don't know that they're strong enough values to like overcome like everybody in the low sevens like you're talking about earlier. And then who's the other guy that's like interesting? Oh yeah, William McGirt, who like is still making cuts and stuff. I was wondering when he was going to pop over eventually.
He played really well for a stretch last week.
Yeah, I think so too.
He was leading in round one, I think, at some point, and kind of fell apart a little bit on day two. But there's a stretch where they're showing him quite a bit on TV.
Yeah, I think he's made his last 5 cuts or so, and like there were a couple good finishes before there. Like, sure, I'll take a flyer for like he's just so much cheaper than last week with a decent stats. Sure, why not? So I could see him in a couple lineups.
Cool.
All right, we'll end it there, I guess. Good talk. I guess real quickly, we can, as always, predict who we're going to pick as our winners of this tournament. Colin, who's going to win?
I'm not going to pick Jason Day just because chalk is so boring. I don't know whose weird upside do I like. I'm just going to double down on Patrick Reed because he's still due apparently, and I just have to
can't pick him every week
until he wins. Yeah, he was close last week, so I'll just say he's due.
The year is 2025, and Colin and I are doing a PGA podcast, and he's still picking Patrick Reed.
Yeah,
I can't wait for it. Okay, Pete, who's winning?
I'm gonna go DJ. I'll go DJ. Get some win. Yeah. I don't know about. I don't have a strong take on the top guys. Like, literally, wouldn't surprise me if any one of these guys. Actually, you know what? I'll do a more bold call, and I'll say Paul Casey wins.
That is bold. All right.
So the fact that you don't have strong takes, that means you're going to sort of just distribute your ownership in tournaments, Pete?
I'm going to find. I need to do a little bit. I want to see how the weather turns, and if there's any other things to find an edge. And obviously, I'll include that or what I have on the model preview. But yeah, it's a tough tier in that range. I think it's more deciphering these value guys and who you really like the most there, and then letting roster construction make some of the tough decisions for you.
Cool. All right. Well, we have some good content coming out tomorrow. We got some plays for both this tournament and the Euro Tour. Colin's second part of his series on course history. It came out today, so go read that. And good luck. Yeah, play around with our models in our free trends tool, and good luck this week in both Euro and PGA. We'll talk to you guys next week.
Go Illini.